several of our team members a bunch of questions. So part of what you see is actually coming from them. So, however, I stand here with fear and trembling, and when talking about failure, and I want to try to keep the focus on how to identify and resolve failure in the workplace. But it won't stay in the workplace because it's intertwined relationally. In the workplace, we have relationships, and those relationships can be isolated from the workplace as from home or church or society, and then spiritually as well. So how we deal with failure in the workplace is a result of how we deal with failure relationally and also spiritually. And so I won't. This is not going to be a perfect topic on any of these three, so it's going to be kind of a mix of the three. So hopefully that won't be confusing. So anyway, I just didn't know how to proceed here, and I was asked by several people how I feel about it, and I said, well, I'm trying not to feel like a failure before my time here, ahead of my time. So I thought maybe the easiest way to actually have this presentation is just have a blank presentation. Would that work? There is the least chance of failing right now if we stop right here. And really, I can't expect any criticism because I didn't put myself on the line. I didn't project any opinions and any thoughts. But I will proceed. So failure has expressions, several expressions. And maybe the most common expression is a dead end. So we find ourselves in what I would say stuckness. So we're stuck. So we run into an issue and we just don't know which way to turn. So we don't turn. We don't decide. We just conclude this is too hard. We'll complain. We'll opine. We'll criticize. But we won't proceed because we're in a dead end. All failures present dead ends, I think. I think that would be fair. However, some failures are more dramatic and they present explosion. So this, I think, is the main reason we avert and avoid failure. We don't want to go out on that limb or in case we make that mistake, in case we get that rejection, in case we feel bad inside if we fail, if we're less than perfect, or if we're way less than perfect. And what can happen out of that situation is a big explosion because we usually affect other people through our failure. So just keep that in mind. But there's one other option with failure, and that is to ignore the failure. I think that's where I fall in a lot, is just ignoring the failure. So we can fail, and we just won't call it failure. We'll just call it maybe a mistake. Maybe we won't even go that far. It's just, things happen. So we'll just find another road and just keep moving on. What can happen in this situation, if we ignore it repeatedly, is we do create a stack of failures in the background, and eventually we will hit that dead end or that explosion. So ignoring failure, ignoring the mistake, ignoring the quality issue, ignoring what happens is not actually a very good option, but I think many people fall in that category. That's where I would tend to fall myself. But we think ignorance is bliss, right? But we are wrong. Ignorance is not bliss. The reason is there's a day of reckoning coming and a calling out of what we have done or not done or done wrong. And so ignorance is the wrong path. So let's explore failure just a few points. This is not exhaustive again, but let's explore different aspects of failure. What is failure? And can failure be measured? And is failure deterministic? And what I mean by that is the fate of failure always going to be a certain way? Is failure, can failure dictate us? Is it deterministic? What is failure? Failure is the consequence of a wrong choice or action. So as we go about our daily duties and work and life, we will occasionally and probably many times make wrong choices and have wrong actions. And that's okay. We're human, we're not God. So we will fail. And at least we have company. Everyone fails, even the best of men. And if you don't believe that, the scripture says this: for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. If I would paraphrase that, I think I would say something like this: for we have all failed and messed up and embarrassed God. Something like that, I think. Just made God an embarrassment. So, which is incidentally a key, maybe a primary emotion of failure that is unpleasant is we're ashamed. We feel shame. And when we feel shame and embarrassment, and we feel like less than the best, we feel like maybe the least of men, we're like maybe dirt. Maybe we feel like a complete and utter failure. Well, welcome. We all have failed. So really there's no one here that has any advantage over the other person, because we're all in the same boat. We're all made of the same stuff. And failure is the opposite of success. And I don't know that I like that word, but I don't know what else to use here. So while we strive to eliminate and reduce failure, I think we're actually striving to succeed. And that's okay. It's inborn. We have the need to succeed. We have a right to succeed. We're created to succeed. But in spite of all that, we still fail. We can succeed, and we can have the motivation and the desire and the determination to succeed for wrong reasons. We can do this so we look good, or feel better, or feel better than the next person. Some of those reasons are not good reasons. Relationally, they're damaging. And failure stops progress. And I think we understand that. Failure stops progress. That's where the dead end comes in. So these were different questions I asked different people, how they would view things in their own lives. And here are some more questions. So, measuring failure. Oh, my dog popped up here. We measure by quantity. How often do I make a mistake? How often do I make a mistake? And believe me, we'll beat up ourselves on these measurements. Or we'll say, how big is the mistake? How huge is this? And we compare. So we'll make maybe a very small mistake, but it feels like a huge mistake. It feels like maybe an utter failure. Or if we make a lot of mistakes, we're constantly failing, we think. That's how we measure ourselves with failure, or by force. So who have I hurt by this mistake? Maybe that's the biggest one. I think I cringe from that one the most. I don't measure so much by quantity or by size, but I do measure by force. So if I have hurt others by my mistake, I feel really bad. I feel like an utter failure. Or if I have hurt somebody badly. Now, I know I just understand that I will hurt others. We all hurt others. It's just a fact and a part of life. But if we hurt maybe closest to us, if I hurt my wife, maybe it means more than if I hurt a person I don't know on the street. I don't know. But the intensity of the outcome, that hurt, that devastation, that is the force of the failure, and I measure myself against that. Now here is a graph that shows our monthly crash reports here at Dyna. This is a report or a picture of failure that we personally have. Now, I didn't post this to make anybody feel bad. In fact, I want this whole topic to be a positive topic, and I want you all to leave with a sense of hope. And the same way with this chart here, this crash report chart. This indicates, I think, month one, we had about 100 failures that were recorded. And as it moved along the graph there by month 8, we're down to less than 40. So approximately a third of where we ended up, or where we started off. So if you look at that, it's a way of measuring failure. So if we make a mistake, if we have a quality issue, if something happens, we just stop and we say, we failed. Fill out a crash report, and we deal with it. We'll get into that shortly. But first we measure, first we acknowledge, first we map it. Now I can take that and I can feel a sense of failure. Like this is a company that's really struggling, isn't it? We've got every month, we've got between 20 and 30 failures going on, and probably a bunch that aren't even reported. But I don't take it that way at all. I say we started at 100, and we brought it down to between 20 and 30, or 40. And so I would say there's lots of successes in that, indicated in that graph, and I see a lot of hope there, actually, as a matter of fact. I'm pleased with what I see in that graph. So measuring can be useful. It shows the direction that we're taking. But let's do a reality check here. Anyway, there is nothing like a total, complete failure. That's a fact, even if we feel like one. And there's nothing like a total, complete success, even if we're driven to perfection. The reality is that neither one is quite true. Now we could probably take that different ways. I would say, if one were to end life without Jesus, that would end in utter failure. Yes. But I'm talking about in this life, while we're on our journey here, there's no person that has or is a complete, utter failure. Neither is there one that has complete success. So, while some may be more driven to perfection than others, just keep that in mind. You won't reach it. Is failure deterministic? Failure's outcome is not necessarily determined. There are different outcomes to failure. And we don't always, but what does make a difference in the outcome is our response. So the failure itself is not necessarily the end of the road. That doesn't say what the outcome is, the bomb or the dead end. But our response to that failure probably will determine that outcome. Failure has two basic outcomes or presentations. And the first, maybe most common one, is that of despair. Wait a minute. Despair. When we fail, we tend to despair. We feel bad, we blame ourselves, we trash ourselves, we get depressed. We don't know. We tend not to feel very good about ourselves when we fail. We despair. We tend to despair. But there's another outcome that can be hope. Now, if you look at that horse, number 2, he's still failing. But he's not a failure. He's not an utter failure whatsoever. He actually nearly won. But some people will, in second place, feel like an utter complete failure. But you know what? That's a lie. That's just not true. And I see in the second one hope, because maybe next time or the next time, with some improvement, with some correction, with some guidance, maybe he could become the winner. Let's talk about resolving failure. So let's shift gears just a little bit here. And I think Jesus had a really good formula for resolving failure, even in the workplace or otherwise. He said this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. So how does that work to resolve failure in the workplace? Well, I think of these, the way is the key. So I would like to focus on that, and I want you to have that as the takeaway from this session, is the way. The way is a way out of failure. So find a way. It's a strategy for correction by the truth. So we explore the facts. And I think we've got individuals here who can explain this much better than I, but we will have to take an honest look at what happened first. So we will take whatever situation in the workplace, we fill out a crash report, what happened, and there's different ways of doing this. Asking questions, the 5 whys. The next way is, the next one is life. After we analyze it, after we explore a way, there's vitality and hope and expectation for improvement. That's where hope comes in. That's why failure doesn't have to convert itself to despair. It will, generally, but it doesn't. That's because of misguided focus or because that there's a lack of a way. So if I want to give a message here, it's instead of focusing on perfection, instead of focusing on drivenness or focusing on eliminating all failure, let's focus on the way, because we will meet failure. And as we meet failure, we need a way. Exploring the truth. So uncover the facts that led to the failure. You need to understand what happened. And there's different ways of doing that. But here at the workplace, we asked the 5 whys. And what we're trying to accomplish here is to find the root cause of what actually happened. So if you take a failure, and you analyze it, and you ask why 5 times, you probably will come up with a root cause of why this happened. So just exploring the truth is kind of a first step of creating a way. If we don't explore the truth of really what happened, we won't be able to create a solution and a way out of that failure. And another way is to involve others. And I say that's pretty important, because if I asked any of you, I think probably you would all agree that in any given failure, in any given circumstance, if we're left alone with that failure to try to understand that and try to actually get a correct picture of it, we won't. I think most of us will magnify the failure in our mind instead of actually looking at it realistically for what it is. Perspectives are important to understand what actually happened. And I would guess in most cases, the other's perspectives are going to be less, understanding or less, they'll be more objective. Find a way out, a solution. This step is critical, and I just want to remind us that when we find ourselves in failure, find a way. If we don't find a way, we will despair. That's where we stress out. That's where we get panicked. That's where the heart races. That's where the sweat pours. That's where we can't sleep because we don't find a way. And there always is a way. It's not always apparent, but there always is a way forward and a way out. And sometimes it's not within ourselves to see that. Sometimes we have to surround ourselves by other people, get their perspectives. Sometimes it's just the smallest thing that can be just the biggest problem in our mind. But actually letting somebody else come in and analyze that for us can clarify that way out. And this is what Jeremiah says, 2 different translations. I like that first one better. It says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord." That means he has a solution to any plan. And I don't care if that's in the workplace, personal life, spiritually, whatever it is. He has a plan. The question is, are we in a position where we submit ourselves to that plan and describe that plan into our life? But there is a plan. There is a way. King James says, "For I know the thought that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." It's that expected end is what we're after. That's where the hope lays. And also, we can be assured that the Lord is not here with a big stick over us. He actually has thoughts of peace, not of evil. And if I could just give that message yet, that sometimes we think God is this big unmerciful being that has this big club, and every time we fail, he gives us a whack. But that's not true. He doesn't do that. That's where his grace is amazing, and that's where he provides a way. He's not looking at punishing us. He's trying to show us the way out. And then there is life. The way brings correction and progress. And sometimes that hurts. And sometimes it's hard to bend our will to God's way, or to bend our will to our supervisor's way, or to quality control. But the way brings correction and progress. And I don't know how else to state it, except it's hard and it's painful and sometimes shameful, but you don't need to stay there because the outcome is much brighter future. Correction prevents future failures. That's what we're after. We're trying to prevent this terrible cycle of failing over and over and over. Especially if they're the same failures. That's when it becomes extremely tiring and discouraging. That's when despair sets in. But correction in the way prevents that. And the way ultimately brings hope and life. And again, the way out brings hope and life. And if you feel despair because of failure, that's because you don't understand the way. And there always is a way. We're all on a journey, and we're in different stages of that journey. And sometimes what affects me today one way might affect me differently a year from now. What affects you today, the same thing could affect me a different way today because of where we're at on our journey. And so we're all in this together. But the way out ultimately brings hope. Sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes it's not immediately apparent, but there always is a way. And finally, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That's Jesus' remedy, and that's the way out, ultimately, finally, in our spiritual failures, sins, and distress. He is the ultimate way. But the bonus is, if we believe in him, if we accept him and accept his way, that makes the biggest difference in our work, in our relationships, and in our social life as well. That's all I have for today.